So we are continuing the series, The Night Before He Bled. And what we're looking at this morning is really profound, really impactful, some of the most useful words Jesus ever taught, words that I hope you'll take to heart, and I'm even going to give you a verse to memorize from what we're going to hear today. And the reason that this is so practical, so important for us, is that Jesus teaches us, in the words we're going to look at today, what to do when our hearts are troubled. Have you ever had a troubled heart? Have you ever been anxious about something? Have you ever been fearful? It's almost a silly question, isn't it? Living in this world, we go through times like that. It seems like those times happen most often when we are faced with a life change of some sort. And the bigger that change, the harder it is for us to deal with, and usually the more troubled our hearts become. Psychologists, did you know this? They have created a life change index. So they went down a scale from 1 to 100, 100 being a massive change in your life that's really going to rock your world, and a 1 being, not much change at all. And they put some things on that scale. And do you just want to hear what a few of those things are? So, for example, the top thing on the list is the death of a spouse. That's a cool 100 on the scale. That if you lose your spouse, that's one of the hardest, biggest life changes that you will ever go through. Here are some more things. Moving, and it's hard to give a number to that one because moving is usually a domino effect of a series of big changes. You're changing your job, you're changing your house and your location and your doctor, and just one thing after another, change after change after change. It amounts to probably not far off of losing a spouse. It's got to be in the 80s or 90s, I would guess. Other things on the list, divorce comes in at a 73. Marital separation not far behind at a 65. Jail term, 63. Death of a close family member, also a 63. A personal injury or illness, and this one I would think would strongly vary depending on how serious those things are, but a 53 is what they put on the index. Marriage, so not all these things are bad things. Marriage can be a good thing, but it is an enormous life change. Marriage on that scale, they put that one at a 50. Fired from your job is a 47. Okay, so just of the things that I've listed, any of them, if any of these have ever happened to you in your entire life, would you raise your hand, please? I'm just curious. Actually, a majority of people have their hands up there. When we face life changes, and there are lots of other things that aren't as big on the index list, but they sure seem big to us. When we face these big life changes, that can lead to a troubled heart. And even if the change doesn't come, but we're afraid that it might, that can lead to a troubled heart, to anxiety. Now, it's not the change itself that produces the troubled heart, which is kind of interesting. So we need to go a little bit deeper. What is the real issue of the troubled heart if it's not the change? And here's why I feel confident in saying it's not the change itself that causes a troubled heart. There was a man, a psychiatrist and a neurologist. His name was Viktor Frankl, a Jewish man who lived through internment at a Nazi death camp. And while he was there, he couldn't turn off his training and his brain as a psychiatrist. And what he observed as he looked at the people that were there with him, facing death every day, and in the most stressful situation that you can imagine, having gone through the biggest life changes anybody could ever go through, he noticed this interesting fact, that there were those that went through this and they were a wreck. They were despondent, they were depressed, they were in despair, they were a shell of their former selves. They just went through life almost like a zombie in that camp. And then he saw that there were other people, the exact same circumstances, that still had hope, that still had strength, that still had confidence. It almost seemed like they weren't overly troubled by the circumstance. So he studied it and he observed it, and what he discovered was this: that whether or not a person was troubled depended on where they found meaning in life. What was their meaning focal point? So those whose meaning focal point, the things from which they derived their meaning in life, had been lost. That's where they found their meaning. They had lost their job or their career or their influence or their position or their money or their family. And when those things were lost because their meaning was derived from it, they therefore lost hope and they despaired. That was one camp. But there were others who derived their meaning in life from something bigger, from something transcendent, from something that had not yet been lost in spite of the circumstances in which they were living. What Viktor Frankl discovered in that death camp, Jesus had actually taught almost 2,000 years earlier. What we're going to take a look at from Jesus' words is that he teaches you and I to have a bigger and better meaning focal point in our lives. That we derive our meaning and focus our attention on something bigger and better and unchangeable, because that will calm our troubled hearts. I don't think Viktor Frankl even got to the point where he understood what Jesus is going to teach us today, but we're going to learn it from Jesus himself. So we're going to start in John chapter 14. By the way, Jesus' disciples were going through an enormous change when Jesus spoke the words, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." They were deeply troubled, and there were probably three main reasons that they were troubled. The first one is that they knew that Jesus was going to die. Well, how did they know that? Well, because Jesus had told them, "I'm going to die." If you look in John chapter 12, he had spoken of it then. If you look in the other Gospels, as it's getting closer to his death, he keeps talking about it more and more, and they know, they sense it's coming, it's close. Jesus is going to die. A huge change for them. It also was a transformation in the way they thought about Jesus. How could life go on if Jesus wasn't right there with them as he had been for the last 3.5 years? They were troubled. A second thing Jesus had told them is that one of them was going to betray him. They thought they knew each other. They had been together for over 3 years. And Jesus says one of us will betray him? How could this even be possible? That troubled them deeply. And then a third thing he had just told them was that all of them would abandon him that evening, which was so shocking that bold Peter, of course, speaks up and says, "Maybe all these other schmucks are going to abandon you, Jesus, but I never would." To which Jesus says, "Yeah, not only are you going to abandon me, Peter, but unlike them, you're going to deny even knowing me 3 times before this evening is even up." And they were rattled, because that means I don't even know me, because that sounds so out of character for who I think I am. And Jesus says this is going to happen? How could this be? Enormous life changes, and they were responding to these enormous life changes with troubled hearts because their meaning focal point was not properly set. So Jesus resets it with the words that follow. But first of all, if you're writing in your program, could you just write in the word troubled? When your heart is troubled, and notice I use the word when, not if, because in this sinful world of seismic changes that sometimes happen, and because we are imperfect human beings with imperfect trust, our hearts get troubled sometimes. So how do we correct that? How do we change that? Well, Jesus is going to teach us. So let's take a look, John 14, continuing at verse 1. He says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Now, he's not saying he's not God, but their understanding of him up to this point was not really entirely accurate. The Father and Jesus, the Son, in their minds, were they at the same level? I don't think they were yet. So Jesus is bringing them there. He's saying, so you believe in God, believe in the same exact way, trust, rely upon me also. And he says this, "My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." Okay, so we'll pause there. Jesus has some more important words to say, but already we see that Jesus is redirecting their meaning focal point by reminding them of this important fact: believe that heaven is for real. Believe that heaven is for real. Did you ever hear the book, read the book by that name, or maybe you saw the movie? It's been a while now. It's been a few years back. But the premise was that there was this 4-year-old, this preschooler, who had a near-death experience and got this alleged glimpse of heaven, told his dad all about it. His dad wrote it all down, and it became a best-selling book. And people started to believe heaven is for real, which is kind of silly when we're believing it now because a 4-year-old told us. I've got something a whole lot better than that. The man who is God in human flesh, the man who came into this world from heaven and said, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to rise again on the third day, that man said that heaven is for real. The one who predicted it and then pulled it off, he really did rise from the dead, said heaven is for real. That's way better. So you can believe it. So what Jesus is doing is he's removing our usual way of thinking, the usual bookends. We usually think of birth to death, and this is my life, and what happens in this life, I think about how it influences everything up until my death, or whatever might even hasten my death. That's my context, are those bookends. And Jesus says, hey, what I'd like you to do is this. Take this bookend out and throw it away. You will have a new meaning focal point if you recognize that this world and its problems and its sorrows is temporary, short-lived, and passing. And then comes heaven, which is perfect and glorious and never, ever, ever ends. Heaven is for real. Now, to help drive this point home, Jesus made 3 points about heaven. The first one was this. He said, my Father's house has many rooms. So he wants you to know this, that first of all, heaven is all about being in the presence of the Father. That when you get to heaven, sometimes we talk about, that's when I'm going to see my loved one who died again, and that's what we're thinking about. But Jesus says, no, actually the big thing about heaven is that you're going to see God. You will be in the presence of the almighty, perfect, glorious creator of the universe. You will be in the immediate presence, face to face with the one who is beautiful and glorious and majestic and who provides all good things. And there will be nothing hindering that relationship, just this perfect connection with God. You will be in the Father's house. And when you get there, God's not going to say, I guess your name is here. I'm sorry, there's no occupancy right now. Could you just have a seat over there while we find a room for you? No, there are many rooms in the Father's house. And more than that, Jesus says this, I am going there to prepare a place for you. You have a specific room, a specific place in the Father's house that Jesus is preparing with you in mind. This is a really cool image. So maybe we can better understand it like this. Division I schools, when they do their big recruiting of football players, do you know how they do that? They're not allowed to give gifts. They're not allowed to give money to get people to come to their school to play for them. When they've got a really big recruit, they fly them in, they come to the campus, they take them into the locker room. Yeah, this is the locker room here, and they say, there's your locker. Sure enough, their name is already on the locker. Yeah, go check it out. They go up, they open the locker. Inside is their jersey, their uniform. It's got their name printed on the back. They can't keep it, that'd be a gift, but their name printed on the back of the jersey. Then they say, okay, let's go walk out the corridor into the stadium. They got the game noises cranked up on the loudspeakers. As soon as they get out into the stadium, a big cheer erupts from the fake crowd that's not actually there. And they look up, and there on the screen is their name in the big lights. All of this so that they get this clear image. I belong here. There is a place here for me. They were expecting me. And this is what Jesus says about you and heaven. That there is a special place for you waiting in heaven. Jesus is preparing it for you. Your name is on the door. It's already decorated exactly to your taste. It's going to be so comfortable, so beautiful, so glorious. Heaven is for real. Jesus wants you to know that. And then he says this third thing. I will come back and take you to be with me. Now, with this whole imagery, he's going to prepare a place for you, and he's going to come back and take you to be with him. It brings to mind the marriage customs of Jesus' day. So when people heard this, the disciples already, they would have known what he was talking about. They would have been thinking, oh, you're talking about how when a man and a woman get engaged, or back then it was called a betrothal. It was more than an engagement today, which we make and break, it seems, pretty frequently. But back then, it was a promise to get married, a binding promise of marriage. Once they were engaged, once they were betrothed, the man would go back to his father's house, usually, unless they were really wealthy, and he would build an addition on to the father's house, his own father's house, and make a new special room specifically for his bride, which would take months, of course. These preparations would be made. He would finally have the room prepared exactly as he knew his new wife would love it, and then he would go back. He would go back and take her to be with him. There was a big wedding celebration that would last days long, and he would take her to the room that he had specially prepared just for his bride. And this is the picture Jesus wants you to have in mind. The thing that drives you, the thing that gives you meaning and purpose in life, that heaven is for real. You're going there. You're going to be with God. You're going to be in the presence of Jesus. There's a special room just for you. How often do you think about that? It's like if you've been a lifelong Christian, you say, yeah, I already know these things. But do you think about it? Does this go through your head every day, setting and calibrating your meaning and your purpose in life? This is what Jesus wants us to do. Okay, let's go on. Jesus teaches us one more important thing. He says, you know the place to where I am going. To which Thomas says, this is the same guy we always call Doubting Thomas. I don't think that's a great name. I think we should call him Analytical Thomas. Because his brain, I think, kind of works like mine, and I don't want to be called a doubter, but I definitely am analytical. So you almost see Thomas raising his hand. You know the place where I am going. Yeah, Thomas, did you have a question? What was it? Oh, well, I was just wondering, Lord. We don't know where you're going. And since we don't know where you're going, how could we know the way? Can you imagine in this weather I say to you, hey, we got to get away. In fact, I'm even going to pay for it. We're going to go someplace sandy. We're going to go someplace warm. My treat. Hey, we'll see you there. Pastor, I don't know where you're going. And I don't know how to get there. Maybe you could give me that information, because that's kind of important. Otherwise, we're not going to end up in the same place, right? So this is what Thomas is asking also. Great question, and something that we need to know the answer to as well. So here's the problem with the question. How do we get to heaven? What is the way? Human beings get this wrong all the time. We think up a way, but it's the wrong way. And we tend to go in one of two directions. And honestly, both of those ways, those directions are wrong, and they end in the wrong destination. One of the ways you can just say is this. It's moral conformity. So human beings come up with this plan. If I will just live according to a certain standard, if I will live my life in this way, according to these rules, as these religious people tell me I'm supposed to live, or my culture tells me to live, if I will toe the line, if I will get my life in order, if I will work and I will try and I will improve and get on that track, that moral conformity, if I get it right, I'm going to end up in heaven. I'm going to have God's good favor. He's going to take me to be with him. That's one way that human beings have come up with to try to be right with God. It doesn't work. I'll get to that in just a moment, though. There's a second way. Other people think, okay, well, the way to God is through finding the real me. I need to discover myself. I need to find my authentic being. I need to know, by looking deep inside and examining my life, who the real me really is. And then I need to live according to that authentic being who I was made to be. And the more I know myself and discover my truth and live according to my truth, the more I will be enlightened, the more I will be on the right path, the more I will finally be there. I will arrive and I will be right with God. That's something taught in our culture quite a bit as well, and that one is more taught by Eastern religions, but it's also very popular in our thinking today. And Jesus would say, yeah, that way was wrong and that way is wrong. Because at the root of both of those ways that seem very different is the same answer. The way is you. The way is me. You must try, you must work, you must discover, you must enlighten yourself, you, and then you will find the way and you will get to heaven. Now, in stark contrast to that, Jesus says something that nobody ever would have guessed, that no one ever has ever thought of before. And Jesus' answer to finding the way to heaven is this: I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me, Jesus says. The way to heaven isn't you, the way to heaven is me, Jesus says. And this was just a mind-blowing statement that no one had ever lived by before that, and few people do today except for people who call themselves Christians. Jesus is the only way. So can you fill in that blank, please? Believe that Jesus alone connects you to God. Jesus alone connects you to God. You don't connect you to God. Jesus plus you doesn't connect you to God. Jesus alone connects you to God. And so that is why he said, Jesus answered, I am the way. He doesn't say, I'll show you the way. If you will just live like I lived, you'll know the way. If you will just conform to the standard that I am setting, then you'll find the way. And he doesn't say, I, in my life, have gradually figured out my authentic meaning and purpose, that I am the Son of God, and this is who I am, and I live according to my truth. I've been enlightened, and I am the way I am, and you can become what I've become if you'll just do the same and discover your inner self also. He doesn't say any of that. He says, I am the way. In other words, he doesn't say, this is the bridge that gets you to the Father, and here's how you walk across it. He says, I'm that bridge. I am bridging the gap between you and the Father. You walk on me. If I'm not there, you can't get to the Father. It's Jesus who connects us to God. His perfect life, not showing us how to live a perfect life, because we can't and we haven't. His perfect life credited to us by faith as if we had lived it. His death on the cross, not showing us how we must give our life sacrificially for others, an example we must follow. No. Jesus, the way, who died for us, the death we deserve so we won't be punished by God. He is our substitute first and foremost. Jesus is the way. And he also says this, he is the truth. Not his truth, not a truth, not some truth, the truth. He is the truth. If you want to know God, you have to know Jesus. If you want to know the way to God, you can only do it through Jesus and by knowing Jesus. He is the immovable rock of truth that is unmovable, unchangeable, and it is true for everyone, everywhere, of every culture, of all of time. The way to God is only through Jesus. That is the truth. And then Jesus says, I am the life. Not I'm a way that can lead you to life, and I can show you a path that gets you to life, and I can show you how life is actually within yourself. No. He says, I am the life. If we want life now, a meaningful, purposeful, hopeful life now, and a life that never ever ends and goes on forever and ever and ever, it has to be connected to Jesus. Disconnected from him is death, connected to him is life. Jesus is the life. So what is your meaning in life? What is your meaning focal point? What do you derive your purpose for in your everyday life? Have you gone off track a little bit and attached it to things that are perishing and going away and breakable and corruptible and dieable, things that can die? Have you attached your meaning to career or your bank account or even another human being? Certainly a blessing from God, but is your ultimate purpose and meaning, is it tied up in your spouse or in your children or in your parents? Jesus says, no, there's something so much bigger. There's something so much better. Something that no matter what change comes your way in this life will never go away. Something that transcends it all. Heaven is for real, and Jesus is the way. Heaven is for real, and Jesus is the way. And if that is your meaning focal point, and if that is what you believe, your heart won't be troubled. The anxiety will dissolve away. Because whatever you're going through that's troubling you, this will pass. I'm going to heaven. It's perfect, and it's a whole lot longer than whatever this current trouble is. With your meaning focal point reset, Jesus knows your heart will not be troubled. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, so often we look at the wrong things and derive our meaning in the wrong places. Forgive us for that. And through what you teach us today, Jesus, help us to focus on you and on the heaven that you promise. In this world, you told us there will be problems and troubles, but you have overcome the world. So, sharpen our faith and help us to rest fully on you and to set our sights on heaven. And in this way, you have promised you will bring us through this world of sorrows to yourself with full confidence and comfort and faith. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.